And hello, Hearts of Oak. Thank you so much for joining us once again with a brand new guest discussing a huge venture up in the middle of England on prayer, and that is Richard Gamble. Richard, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, Peter, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
It's great. And I've come across the website through different friends. This is the eternal well, you can get eternalwall.org.uk, and if you don't go any further in this interview, then check out that you can see how you can be involved in a huge project, maybe one of the first of its kind, looking at the importance of prayer and looking at answered prayer. And I think often, certainly as Brits, we talk about unanswered prayer, and this is about answered prayer, which is something very different. But this is the eternal wall of answered prayer just outside Birmingham, up in the middle of England. But before we get into all of that, Richard, maybe I can ask you to introduce yourself. You've got a varied background, from Bible college, IT, chaplain at Leicester City, and then this huge project that it seems like a Noah endeavor, being given something which is phenomenal. But maybe take a moment and introduce yourself before we get on to the wall of answered prayer.
Yeah, I'm 56 years old, three children, married, became a Christian when I was 20. I suppose you'd describe me as a bit entrepreneurial. Tried loads of things, planting churches and stuff like that. I was rubbish at it. Um, Bought and sold a software business, been involved in consultancy, all, really varied. And you touched on being a sort of pastor to footballers in the Premier League. So wide and varied, a little bit crazy. Nobody knows what to do with me. But in 2004, I was, and this sounds a bit strange, but I was carrying a cross around my county because I wanted people to just think about Jesus during Easter rather than Cadbury's cream eggs, though I do love them. And while I was doing that, it got a massive reaction. And I sort of prayed and said, God, what do you want me to do next? And he gave me this idea, vision to build a national landmark about Jesus. So the last 20 years of my life have been largely devoted to that.
And this is getting closer. This is opening in 2027, so 3 years away. It'll
Yeah.
be the largest symbol of hope. This is from the website, in the world, and will host a interactive collection of stories that will be a testament to God's faithfulness. And it'll be constructed with 1 million bricks, each one linked to answered prayer. Maybe just touch on that, how people can go to the website and be on one of those for answered prayer, and then we'll take a step back at the process.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the thing that's unique, there are many elements of this project that's unique. But if you look at all the national landmarks across the globe, this is one that is crowd-funded, crowd-sourced, but also crowd-created. So what we're trying to do is create this giant infinity loop piece of art with stories from all over the world. And the idea is that people go online onto eternalwall.org.uk and just share with us as many stories as they can of times that they prayed and how God has answered. And the concept is that other people then can come to the monument or look online. Maybe they type in the storm of life that they're currently going through, and then they can find stories of people who've been in the same situation as them, but have found hope through praying to Jesus. And I suppose part of it is birthed, Peter, from, that there's never any good news. you know, there's never any good news. I don't really watch the news very much these days because I just find it utterly depressing. And we have to find ways to get the message of hope out there. There's a lot of good stuff happening on this planet. God is not dead. He's still alive. He's still active. But we are not in the structures of this world free to share those stories anymore. So we have to find another way.
And I'll not bring up the picture of it because I'll let the viewers and listeners go to the website and look it up for yourself. It is a colossal endeavor. I will get into all of that, but maybe take a step back. I mean, when did you have this idea, which obviously is a God idea because no sane person would come up with this themselves using their logic and reason. But yeah, give me an insight into how you begun to have this idea and then how conversations were. I mean, how do you tell your wife you're going to build something like
Yeah,
this?
I mean that is the thing. I came home one day and my wife saw my little twinkle in my eye, and she was like, "Oh, what's going on?" And I was like, "I think we're going to build a national landmark, babe." And I suppose, the thing is, well, where do you start? And bear in mind, I'm completely impractical. I'm banned from DIY in the house. I set fire to my own bathroom once, and that was the final straw for my wife. So I had no idea where to start with that. It was just an idea and a concept. So really, I spent 10 years talking about it to people and praying. Simple as that. And then I carried on with my different businesses and endeavors. And then 10 years ago, just that was the time when in my prayers I really felt God say, right, it's time to get moving on that. So the way that we started it really was, we ran a global competition with the Royal Institute of British Architects, because I thought I've got to have something to get this going. And the crazy thing was, we did a crowdfunder where I basically said, we're going to build a national landmark about Jesus. It's going to be made of 1 million bricks. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know when it's going to be. I don't know where it's going to be, and I don't know when we're going to be able to build it. But if you want to back this project, that'd be amazing. And we had an incredible story where all the money came in with a day to go on the campaign, and that sort of literally kick-started us to get going. And then with the Royal Institute of British Architects, we ran this global competition, and we got 133 entries from 28 countries, and just tried to get to that point of finding the right design, which is the winning design is like a giant white infinity loop, and it arches sort of 50 meters into the skyline. So to give you an idea, in the UK, for UK listeners, that's about 2.5 times the height of the Angel of the North. For those in the States, if you imagine the Statue of Liberty taken off her plinth, she'd just fit underneath it. So it will be a colossal structure, and there has been a lot of prayer to get to where we've got, and to get the right people to help us to build this.
And when you think of size, the Christ the Redeemer statue, which many people will think of as a symbol of Christianity, in Rio de Janeiro, I think that's like 35 meters or something for the size. So this would tower above something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. But the interesting thing, Peter, is if you Google Christ the Redeemer in Rio de Janeiro, you don't find anything about Jesus. And it basically has turned into this sort of supposedly a symbol of Brazil welcoming all people to the country. And you may Google it and find out about a French bloke who built it. But I think it's diverted significantly from its original purpose. We believe that around 30 million people Google that landmark every year. And our vision, if you like, is, well, if we can get 30 million people Googling Eternal Wall, then they're going to open it up and find this database of 1 million answered prayers. And what are you going to do? You're going to want to search it. You're going to want to find out the things that God has done. And we hope that will inspire people to try praying.
But I think we find in today's age that a lot of signs that were built to point people towards God have just become tourist attractions. You think of cathedrals all over the world, and people flock to see a cathedral, and somehow many people don't make the connection that this is actually for God and pointing to God.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I remember in the beginnings of this watching a program about Notre Dame being burnt, and a leading architect started talking about what an incredible piece of architecture this was, and I was like, wait a second, this is built for the glory of God. And so we are doing a lot of work to make sure that we put in mechanisms to make sure that this is always unashamedly Christian. And the beauty, of course, is because every brick represents a story of answered prayer, you can never really change its meaning. And we are building something that is going to last for hundreds of years. And who knows what our country and what Western society is going to look like in 100 years' time. But what I can tell you with supreme confidence is that right in the heart of it, there'll be a massive landmark that will be telling people about Jesus. And I think for your listeners, that's the exciting thing, that if they can take the time to share stories of when they prayed, those stories are going to keep being told long after we've all left the planet. It's a proper legacy project in that respect.
It's very unusual, maybe for the UK, for US listeners, for the War and Posse, faith and Christianity is very much a public issue, where people regularly talk about. We've moved far away from that in the UK. I'm sure there must have been people that said, Richard, maybe we need something a bit smaller, just hidden away somewhere. We don't need to be so loud about this.
Yeah, it's really interesting we have like a public consultation for the planning process, the zoning process for those in the States. And somebody came up to me, a Christian, and she said, I know God answers prayer, but why do you have to brag about it? And sort of stormed off. And it's very interesting to me that the British culture is one of reserve, not really wanting to brag about it. And yet, we've had an incredible story about how God gave us the land so that we know this is exactly the right place to build it. And God has decided to do that in a country that is so quiet. But the word of God is pretty clear. There are literally hundreds of scriptures that talk about proclaiming the deeds of the Lord, remembering the things that he's done, meditating on his deeds. There's loads of evidence of people putting stones down to remember what God has done. And so I do think it's going to be a little jolt to the culture in this country when it finally starts to get built.
The size of it, you touched on that, having the land. You don't put something like this just in your back garden. So what were those conversations? Because you have an idea of concept. One, you can build it. That's one thing. You need to put it somewhere. What were those conversations like with local authorities or local landowners, as you sought to find not only a piece of land, but permission to put it there?
Well, I'll take those two things because they're two significant stories, really. In terms of the land, we presented the concept in Parliament in 2000, I think it was 2014. And I remember one of the members of Parliament asking me, well, this is a great vision, but how are you going to fund it? And I just, quick as a flash, said, I've got a really big backer behind me, which at the time I was very convinced that was Jesus that was behind me, because I only had £5 in the bank. I was very happy that he didn't follow up with a question of who that big backer was. But at that point, I was like, well, I really need to find some land. So we were invited to go to a conference, my wife and I, in Redding, California. And we went to that conference, and my wife and I were like, okay, we've got to find land now. And then somebody came up to us and said, hey, I've been praying. I don't know who you are, but I feel like I've got a word from God for you. Which I was like, oh, right, okay. And she just basically said, you know, God wants you to know he's got some heavenly land for you. Now, for me, that was pretty amazing early on in the journey to travel halfway across the planet and somebody to tell me something like that. So I just had a chat with my team. I've got some people praying. And I said, you know, I've got this word that God's got some land. And one of my team just said, well, I'll just ask him where it is. She said, that'll save us a lot of time and money. And I just sort of laughed and went, yeah, okay. And so she basically prayed and, you know, sent me a Google map with this piece of land circled and said either this is the land or the person who owns it is going to be significant for the project. And then, but when she sent it through, what she didn't know was 2 days previous, the guy who owned that land had emailed me and asked to meet with me, which is mad. And so then I meet with him, and he basically, at the end of the meeting, God had spoken to me in 2004 to build a landmark. He then told me that God had spoken to him in 2003 to build a landmark. And I'd never told him
You mean God was ahead of you? Surely not.
Yeah, I know. Well, that has been one of my major lessons on this 20-year journey. He has a better plan than me. And yeah, so incredible. So he decided to give me some land. I didn't tell him about the land that the woman had circled. And basically, he gave me a number of bits of land which didn't work. And then eventually he paid an architect to look at all the land that he owned in the UK. And he came back with the piece that the woman had circled, which is just outside Birmingham, which is 90 miles north of London, in between two motorways, where, you know, I think it's sort of about 800,000 people will see it every week. It'll have that much impact. So that's great. But then the massive hurdle on top of that is how do you get planning? And in context of we're talking about a country where you can lose your job for wearing a cross. You know, we are now, I think, you know, in recent days, somebody has got arrested for praying, you know, outside silently praying. So we now live in a country where in certain parts of the country it is illegal for a Christian to silently pray. I mean, it's an incredible move. So for me on that journey, Peter, I'm talking to people about this great vision and everyone's going, oh, it's really nice, Rich. Yeah, that's great. And inside they're thinking, he is never getting the planning permission. He is never getting the planning permission. But one of the things that I've discovered, I was expecting it to be an immense battle. And it wasn't as much as I thought. There were multi-faith objections. But my argument was, hey, we do live in a multi-faith society in this country, but I love the fact that we live in a multi-faith society because we have the freedom to express our faith. And this is how we, as a faith, want to express it. And actually, the planning consultant did a brilliant job of demonstrating that their multi-faith policy couldn't restrict them from giving us permission because it wasn't multi-faith. So, you know, it was a long process. COVID hit in the middle, but we just kept on going. And, you know, through a lot of prayer, we pretty much turned around the council that was 14-0 against to winning 13-0 with one abstention. And the council are all behind us. They're very, very positive. They appreciate the sensitivity in which we're approaching this. Because in our education centre, we will have a piece where we say, well, this is what other faiths believe about prayer. I don't think we need to be shy about that. And I'm very happy for people to come and make their own decisions. But the beauty of the project is you're creating a piece of art that allows people the space and time to consider whether Jesus is alive and whether they should pray. And as long as you do that in the appropriate, sensitive way, I think it's okay. Obviously, for the council, it's a massive bonus that we're building a national landmark that I think we did an economic report that said it's going to generate 1.2 billion for the local economy in 10 years. So, there were practical economic reasons why they were positive, but I didn't get the degree of opposition I was expecting in that respect.
As a sidestep, I would also love to get to Redding, California, but never been able to get there. I've tried on 2 occasions, and both times God's put a block. So I'm hoping for the third time. So
Oh,
I can pigeonhole you now immediately, Richard. But it's that opposition, because this is about prayer. It can be general. People can see it as general. You talk to those who are not Christians who say at times of crisis they pray. Say, well, who are you praying to? And that's a confusing topic for them when they don't actually believe in any greater being, in any creator. But what were the conversation? Because again, we live in a very multicultural society. We live in a society where under 50% say they probably believe in God. Church attendance has fallen, and you're probably doing what, in effect, the church should be doing, but maybe has taken a back seat on this. But tell us of those, the conversations you have with local authority, with councils, as you're putting forward. What was that like? Because you talked about full opposition to full acceptance.
Well, I think the I think in some respects the narrative that we are a secular society is false. I don't believe that. I don't believe that is the truth. And so we're spun statistics that just aren't true. We did some research just after COVID, and 50% of 25 to 18-year-olds said that they prayed at least once a month. Now, when that was presented on the BBC, they spun that, and they spun it to say, well, there's a rise in Islam and a rise in Sikhism, and I was like, that is not what the statistics say. That's not what the research says. And you can go online and see me getting quite cross on the BBC, but the reality was those statistics were 56% of people said that they were Christian. I think it was 7% said they were Muslim. So the statistics don't bear that out. And I think even the narrative of like, oh, well, the church is in decline. I don't believe that. That is not what I'm seeing. And what I'm seeing, I'm in a unique position because I'm traveling around churches all over the country to share about this vision. And what I'm seeing is that there are pockets of churches that are seeing explosive growth in this country. And that growth is predominantly, in your sort of 15 to 25-year-olds who of a younger generation coming through who want certainty. Their identity is based in the certainty of the Word of God, and they're attracted to it. So I think when you present that with more sort of statistics to back it up, it shows that this is of interest. And one of the surprising things for me, Peter, on the journey is the amount of people who are, most of the opposition I've had has been church-based opposition. And for people who don't have a faith, they love it. It's so encouraging. We had a guy put up a sign in our office. He was like, this is amazing, and just took loads of brochures from us and just went off and told everybody about it. So I think when this goes up in 2027, it's going to have a major impact, not only on the nation, but I think it'll spread across the nations. I think it's the timing of God that we're building this in. I personally believe it like a spoke in the revival that's coming.
Yeah, 100% with you. Another concept of this is, look, we have many statues of saints in churches covered with paintings of Jesus. But that's focused on the person of God, where this focuses on the relationship with
Correct.
God, because there's no way you can look at prayer. You have an image of God, and that's an image, but this is a direct link to who God is. And that's why this is something, I think, fairly different.
Yeah, and I think people, when they hear of the title Eternal Wall of Answered Prayer, often think that we are sort of promoting what I would call a supermarket God. You present your list and you get all the things. Well, that has definitely not been my experience over the last 20 years trying to build this. And so you're going to have a whole range of stories in there. And some of them are immediate wows. We had one come in yesterday of a person with a brain aneurysm that got healed, and you read it, you're like, wow, this is just amazing. But then other stories are stories of people who've waited 50 years for God to answer their prayer. And then other stories are, this is what I prayed, but the answer was no. And this is how God helped me through the suffering of that answer. And what people, I think, will be surprised about, and you've absolutely hit the nail on the head, is this is about relationship. It's about having a relationship, and we want to really encourage people to share loads of stories that then paint that picture. And 1 million is a huge number. I mean, again, my naivety, I just went, oh, let's just do 1 million. That sounds good. I mean, if we put 1 million Lego bricks on top of each other, it would reach into the stratosphere. That's how big 1 million is. So 1 million stories is a lot. But for people who come, whether they visit or whether they visit online, if somebody's in Dallas and they go onto the database, they may ask the question, well, does God answer prayer in Dallas? And they'll be able to search through the database and find stories from the place that they live, wherever they are in the world. They've only got to find one story that they believe in, and it's going to rock their world. And that's what we're trying to achieve. That's our way of making hope visible.
I think the term unanswered prayer makes people come up with an idea that God chooses to ignore prayer. Yeah. Yet the flip side is, which I'm sure will come across in the educational center, is that that unanswered prayer means prayer that God has said wait or has not said yes or no. There only is one of two answers. This is binary. It's yes or no in terms of answer. It's never a ignore.
Yeah, I think there is. I totally agree. I don't really buy for the philosophy or theology of unanswered prayer. I think it is a comfort for many people to not press into God and to stop praying. I don't want to be glib about that. I've had many times where God has not answered prayer and in the way that I would like, and that does cause pain. So I know that a lot of people would swap all those answered prayers that they have had for the one to keep their loved one with them. I get that, but I think God is less interested in the moment when the prayer is answered or isn't answered, and more interested in the relationship and the journey that we travel. And that's the message that we've got to get out to the nation, because as you've touched on, the church is largely on mute in this country. It's been put on mute by different strategies, and we've got to break open to that, to say that actually that relationship's available for everybody. I heard somebody saying, it was a very interesting comment. They said, in relation to the guy who was healed at the pool of Bethsaida. Is that the right way to say it? And they said, if that had happened in the modern day, journalists would be all over interviewing the 1,990 people who didn't get healed and say, well, how did you feel about that? And that's the trap, I think, on unanswered prayer, is that instead of people going, wow, that's amazing, God did that, they go, yeah, but why didn't he do this? And why didn't he do that? We're not getting involved in that. We are very simply going, we're just going to tell you loads of stories. I'm going to tell you loads of stories of the amazing things that he's done. And, we're having those stories fly in. I've got 2 stories about God helping people to move jeeps out of sand dunes. I mean, that's just ridiculous. That I never thought we'd get that. But, it's incredible to see them come in, and it will be, I think, an absolute treasure trove for people once we're up and running.
Well, people will learn that God is creative, if nothing else. But on the top of the website, there's a tagline, "Making hope visible," which is a really interesting idea, because hope, according to the world's thinking, is kind of that expectation or desire for something to happen. It's not really rooted in reality as such. We could unpack the whole concept, but what do you mean by making hope visible? Because hope, as maybe a feeling, is something that's hidden, but
Mm.
you want to put this on one of the largest monuments in the world on hope. So what do you mean making hope visible?
I suppose the best way, let me describe it like this. If I can describe it in a single story. I was diagnosed 30 odd years ago with a disease called ankylosing spondylitis, which causes extreme curvature of the back, and met with the doctor, and he basically said, it's going to move up your back, and as it moves up, as it gets to the top, I mean, these are his words, he went, "You're screwed." And I just went out of that surgery going, I was quite angry, and I was like, I'm not going to have those words over my life. I know that he's an expert, he's trying to do his best, but I'm not going to let that overrule what the Word of God says about me. Now, I spent a good 15 to 20 years praying to be healed, and I was healed. So we often live in a culture where fear mongering, despair, bad news, which we touched on in the beginning, is all that's ever broadcast. So I'm imagining somebody who maybe is diagnosed with ankylosing spondylitis and loses hope. And they, whether they're digitally visiting or physically visiting, find my story, and then that gives them hope that there is an alternative. That the facts that they've been presented with are not the truth. They're the facts, but they're not necessarily the truth. And so it hopefully moves them into a dynamic of like, there's an alternative here, I can pray. And that way, we are stacking together a million bricks to actually declare to the nations that there's a whole load of hope here. There's a whole load of evidence that can change your mindset and your paradigm that you're currently operating in. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does, and I think it's a concept which sometimes, many Christians struggle with, but the world 100% struggles. And there's a verse in the New Testament that's well known, often read at weddings, and written by Apostle Paul to the church in Corinth, which is just west of Athens. And it's 1 Corinthians 13:13. I said, "Now these three remain: faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love." I think people have all those three concepts are utterly under attack,
Yeah.
and people are questioning what it means. But hope is faith and love. People maybe understand because there's a worldly understanding of what they are, but it's interesting, this term hope, that it's one of those three, I think, which people maybe struggle to grasp and understand, because in Christianity, in the Bible, it's rooted on absolute, and that is God. Where in the world, it's shifting sands, and therefore people don't
Yeah.
have that foundation or root, so they don't have any hope in anything.
Yeah. And I my journey in this impossible journey to build a national landmark, and hey, listen, we're starting in March. We're going to make a big announcement next year. I've had to constantly, at times on a daily basis, recalibrate my mind and my soul and my spirit, because you get a barrage of, you can't do it, it ain't going to happen, you're never going to raise the money, you'll never get the stories, you'll never get the planning permission, no architect's ever going to want to design this, and the list is massive. But where I get my hope from is I look at the stories where God has done things on the journey that no man could do. And that hope then causes me to pray for the next obstacle to overcome. And that hope then over time transforms into faith, which is the conviction that it's going to happen. And so we are, I think, going to be a catalyst for literally millions of people to begin that hope journey, which we trust will transform to a faith and a conviction that God can.
And this is all another word that comes into mind is thankfulness. And I think we often take things without giving thanks, and the Bible is full of stories. I mean, the lepers, when Jesus healed 10 lepers and one came back and thanked Jesus. I think we are often guilty of a lack of gratitude. And I know that's often now talked about in a worldly context. You can write down your thoughts of gratitude each day, your journaling, all of that. Well, it was written in the Bible a long time ago, this concept of thankfulness. And such a public monument of gratefulness, I think it'll be extremely powerful.
Yeah, and I think it's something that doesn't naturally sit in our culture. And if you look at Israel, with their Thanksgiving, their remembrance of the Passover, that thread runs through the Bible. And I wrote a book simply called Remember, which just looks at the way that the importance of that remembrance and thankfulness and appreciation of what God has done, and continually revisiting that and the importance of that. And we are in this sort of like throwaway society, which I think has actually influenced Christianity, where people are praying, God is answering, and half the time they don't even notice he's answered. And if they do, they just go, well, that's great, and then move on to the next one. So there are many layers, I think, to what we're trying to achieve here, and I hope even the act, if you like, the process of Christians going, I wonder what brick I shall have. I mean, I'm hearing of loads of people going, I don't even know if God has answered my prayer. Then they spend 20 minutes thinking about it, and suddenly they get a great list, and they're thankful, and it restores their faith and renews them. So hope some of your listeners will do that for us. That'd be amazing.
No, they definitely go to the website and see, have a think of how God has intervened in your life, and whether it's big or small, we are called to give glory to God and respond to that. And the Bible is actually, for one other term in the Bible, is there are a number of cases whenever a prophet or the angel comes and says, the Lord has answered your prayer. And I kind of think we live in a society where we would say, which prayer? Because we just come with our shopping list. And you talked about the concept of pressing in, and because we don't focus on one issue or a number of issues, we kind of, we prayed that yesterday, move on to something else.
Yeah.
And there's this idea of actually holding on to something you need or believe in, and you don't let go. As Jacob, you don't let go until you get an answer.
Yeah. There's a great song out at the moment called "Don't Stop Praying" by Matthew West, and it's a great challenge. But again, that's the short-termism. You mentioned it's a bit of a Noah project. When you look at Noah, most of his time was spent waiting. He had very little action, to be truthful. Most of the time, he's just hanging about waiting for God to do the next thing. But again, as I said, that's the process and the journey of going deeper with God. If God just said yes all the time, we'd never learn about him. We'd never learn his ways, which is more precious than any answer and more precious than gold and silver. I think there's a film with Jim Carrey, isn't there, when he's God, Bruce Almighty, that's it, and he just says yes all the time. It's an utter disaster. And I'd probably be easier to get answered prayers, but I'm not sure the state of the world would be in. But God loves us so much to hold back those answers at times so that we really get to know him better. And we often draw closer to him in the valleys than we do on the top of the mountain.
Yeah. And also the idea of prayer being public and private. We think in the UK, it's something private prayer. You go to other churches and it's very public with everyone praying at once. You've got different concepts or ideas, but I think we often forget that actually in the UK we did have national days of prayer. Certainly during Second World War, I think there were 6 or 7 days called for prayer. One of the first was the evacuation at Dunkirk, and I think something like this concept, this wall of answered prayer, can point us towards again the act of calling the nation to prayer, because we've a lot to pray about in our nation.
Yeah, that's very good. That's a very good point, and encouraging people to pray big prayers. We've just, I don't want to advertise a competing podcast, but I will give it a go. We're in the middle of a podcast called When We Prayed, which is capturing what actually happened on the 7 times that the King of England called the nation to pray during the Second World War. And some of the stories are incredible. The Dunkirk story that you point out, I think, is particularly poignant because the reality was Churchill was told we'd get 30,000 soldiers off. The king off the beaches. The king called the nation to pray. There's records of over 1 million people praying in churches. And then we see a number of miracles. Hitler changes his mind, makes one of the worst military decisions in history. We see bizarre weather patterns that causes planes to not be able to take off, and yet, by the sea, the sea is described like glass. And all of those, we have incredible immunity of soldiers where they're shot down, they all lie down in the sand, get up and see their silhouettes in bullets, but they're unharmed. I mean, some incredible things happen, but that story of Dunkirk 2 generations on has been lost. It's the film by Christopher Nolan doesn't even mention prayer. It's all put down to the courage of men on boats, which again I believe is part of the answer to prayer, that men were so courageous to do that. And we've put out a video about this, and then you get loads of people going, no, it wasn't that. Well, God wasn't involved. Da, 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 da. And unless we go, well, hang on a second. If God wasn't involved, then why did the whole nation have a day of thanksgiving to God only a few days afterwards? Because they knew it was a move of the divine. But 2 generations later, we've forgotten it. And you see that, of course, in the Bible, where they forget the things that God has done, as they escape from Egypt. So part of our role at Eternal Wall is to capture all those stories of answered prayer through history. So we are capturing stories from 500 BC, 500 AD, sorry, not BC, 500 AD, all the way through to the present day. We are grabbing stories of people being raised from the dead in the north of Scotland, some incredible stories. And we believe that we can demonstrate to people, and we're going to do the same in countries all over the world, but demonstrate to people that actually God's been active. He's been active all this time. It's just been forgotten.
Let me finish off just on how people can be involved. They go to the website, they can have a think when they finish this, sit and have a think about actually you've prayed and how God has answered. Even if you don't click on that link, that's a very important endeavor. But people can also donate. They can play a part financially. They can maybe even send the website to maybe the church leaders, because it's not just the individual, it's about actually churches getting behind. So just maybe touch on some of those to leave people with action points they can take away.
Yeah. Well, first point then, we're a broad church. We want to have all, the vast majority, I won't say all, but the vast majority of the church believes that you can pray and God can answer. So we had 400 church leaders on the land praying together, an incredible show of unity. The more churches we have across the world involved in this, the better. Secondly, we need finance. I'm pleased to say that we're in really good shape. So we'll be signing contracts very soon to begin the building, but we still need more. So please get on board and help us. 18,000 people have done so far, an incredible crowd-funded national landmark. But more precious than those two is your actual story. And you can do that by video, by audio, you can do that by written word, and just go online. And I would say, if you're in England, if you're in the UK, have a cup of tea. If you're in the States, maybe a coffee would be better. And just give us 20 minutes of your life to just think about what God has done, and you will not be discouraged. And then share those stories with us. And those stories will then be shared around the globe for perpetuity. And people will read your stories over time, in this century, in the next century, maybe beyond. And you are going to help people find the God who answers. And what greater privilege is there than that in life?
Completely. So I looking forward to this. Make sure the viewers, listeners are part of it. The eternal wall of answered prayer, which I think will not just be a physical monument, but actually will be a spiritual monument to the nation. So, Richard, thank you for coming on, and I mean a slightly different focus and podcast. But it's essential that this is successful and is built, and that I will certainly want to be there to see it when the ribbon is cut and to see what God has done to bring it together. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing the story of the Wall of Answered Prayer.
Thanks very much for your time, Peter.